All right, now let's move on to ortho. Ortho is a very, very useful tool. When we turn it on, and it stands for orthographic, and orthographic means only X and Y. It will only allow the cursor, when we start to draw our geometry, either straight up and down or straight left and right. Let me illustrate. We'll draw a line. I'm going to start a line. Now notice what's happening. It will only let me draw in whatever direction I begin to move from my first point. If I move to the right, it says, okay, you can go right, but we're going to make it a straight line. And that is the point. It is very useful if we want to draw that same house that we just did with snap and grid. This is another, and I think a better way to do it. As soon as you begin to move your cursor, you'll see that the line is going to follow the cursor. It's attached to the cursor. Well, if we want to draw that house 40 feet long, we're going to start right from the beginning. We pick our starting point, and then we move in the direction that we want to begin drawing the home. And you can give it an actual number. Notice I've put it in down here at the command line, 40 feet. So as long as my cursor is pulling the line in the direction that I want to go, and I give it a number, I can then hit enter. And notice what happened. It drew that line 40 feet long. Now let's move the cursor down, and we'll make the building 20 feet wide. Enter. And then come back 40 feet, and then we want to go vertical 20 feet. And we just drew that same house. To me, that is a whole lot easier than setting up your snap interval, and perhaps showing your grid. It's a personal preference. This is your choice. But you're going to want to get familiar with ortho, because there are times when you will want to draw a line absolutely vertical or absolutely horizontal. Very useful. Okay, we'll turn that off. Next in the status bar is the polar command. This is another very useful feature. It allows you to draw lines at a particular preset angle. Now, in this dialog, you set the increment for the angle. I'm just going to use 45 degrees, and let me show you what effect that has in the drawing. So I've just turned polar tracking on. I'm going to erase these lines. Now let's draw a line. We'll just pick anywhere to start. Now I want you to notice. Now see what happened. We're at 45 degrees from the horizontal, and you can see this imaginary construction line appear as we get close to 45 degrees. And it's telling you that I am going to snap that line to that X if you select enter. And let me tell you when this would be useful. What if you're drawing a leach field, the connections between a septic tank and a leach field? Well, typically those connections are going to be at 45 degree increments. So let's do that. Let's just simulate that we're going to draw the connections between the tank and the field. And there you have it. So polar snaps, think of it as a snap. When you have your polar coordinates or your polar tracking turned on, it will allow you to draw lines at those predefined angles. And you can set those angles to most anything. I would caution you to not use too many different angles, or you'll just get lost with which angle is that? Is it 30 degrees? Is it 15 degrees? Or is it 45? So if you preset to 45 degrees, I mean, that one's pretty easy. So every time you see one of those construction lines appear, you can pretty much know where you are relative to 360 degrees. So polar snaps, polar coordinates are really very useful. And again, I want to illustrate when you're drawing a line and we want to use the polar snaps, our polar snaps are turned on, you'll notice I'm getting that X at the center of the crosshairs. That's saying I'm going to draw that line, I'm going to snap that line to that point. But you'll remember in the previous example when we used orthographic, we could actually pick a beginning point, move in the direction that we wanted to go, and we could give it a number. So let's say 10 feet. Will that work? Well, sure enough, it did. It made that first line segment 10 feet long. Now let's continue, and we'll say that this length needs to be 5 feet. Tell it 5. Press enter. And this last segment we'll say is 7.5 feet. And there it is. And just to prove it, come on, 10 feet. You're seeing some other features here that I'm struggling, or I'm fighting against. Some of the snap commands. Yep, and I didn't select it quite right. But anyway, you can see that putting in those values did force the line to be that specific length. Polar snaps, I do not leave them on because they do conflict with the next feature. But when you have to draw lines at a specific angle and you've already set up your polar snap angle, your default angle, your increment angle, then turn it on and take advantage of it. Next, we come to probably the most important feature in the status bar, and you will most definitely use it hundreds if not thousands of times in the course of your drawing. And it's called, in AutoCAD, O-snaps or object snap. IntelliCAD calls it E-snap for entity snap. So object, entity, potato, potato, it's the same thing. Let's right button on that grayed word and open the settings dialog box, and you'll notice all kinds of options for you. And this will enable you to draw geometry and snap to, for instance, the end point of another line. Let me illustrate that. Let's draw a line just randomly, and we'll draw another line randomly. And now we want to connect the two ends of each of these lines with another line. Well, notice what happens now. you'll see that as we get close to the object or the entity, the snap feature, the snap dialog, or they call it a tip, it's letting you know that it sees the endpoint of that particular object. And if I select using my left button on the mouse anywhere, it will snap right to the end of that entity. And we'll do the same here. Now notice I can be almost anywhere on that line just as long as I am beyond the halfway point. And you'll see, if I move closer to this endpoint, it's going to snap there. If I move closer to this endpoint, it's going to snap there. And you always know where it's going to snap by seeing the box, the little box, the snap box. So that was just one of the snap features. Let's take a look at a few more. Perpendicular. Now let's say we want to draw a line and make it perpendicular to this line. So we start our line and then we move close to, and then we move close to the geometry that we want to snap to. Now notice what happens. You'll see a little mini X and Y icon appear, and that is the icon for perpendicular. It lets you know that it's going to snap this line perpendicular to the one that you're touching. So let's do that. Let's draw another one. Now notice, I do not have to be absolutely perpendicular. If I'm close to perpendicular, it's telling me, okay, I know what you want to do, because you see the icon and you see the tip. The O-snap tip will appear. It says perpendicular. I'm going to draw this line perpendicular to the one that you're touching. Very useful. Now, let's take a look at another one. Quadrant. We'll come back to that one. Midpoint. Let's say we want to draw a line to the middle of another object. Now notice the icon has changed to a triangle, and the O-snap tip is telling us I'm going to draw that to the midpoint of that line. And it lets you very quickly find the middle of an object. That's midpoint.